the January 2023 Clinton Hell's Kitchen Land Use Committee meeting of Community Board 4. We continue to meet virtually based on the governor's executive order to allow public meetings to be held and conducted in such a way. Just to remind everybody of the normal process, we'll have a presentation by an applicant. We'll allow committee questions, open up for any public members to ask questions, followed by committee questions and a committee vote if a vote is necessary. Tonight we have 3 topics to discuss. We have the POPS Public Restroom Committee doing research on a zoning text amendment. We'll hear from them. We're going to have a discussion on JD's topic. I'll have to find in the Dropbox to find out exactly what we're talking about. And then we'll have an update on the Port Authority bus terminal. I'd like to begin with introductions of committee members. Let's start with our illustrious co-chair, JD.
Good evening, everybody. That topic will be the McGraw Hill building on 42nd Street. There's some modifications they want to make to the building's exterior.
Leslie.
Leslie Williams, member of the committee.
Dolores.
Hi, Dolores Rubin.
Frank.
Frank Halzubiak, and I'll mention this because I keep making this mistake. We're now meeting pursuant to the mayor's emergency order.
Oh, thanks. No longer the governor's, now the mayor. Appreciate that, Frank. Dale.
Hi, everyone. Dale Corvino.
Ted.
Hi, I'm Ted Arenas, public member.
Yadira.
Hi, everyone. I'm Yadira Jimenez.
And Chris.
Christopher LeBron.
Thanks, everybody. What I'd also like to do is ask, I know that at the full board meeting, there was discussion about, for voting purposes, that we turn our cameras on. So when we do get to a vote, I'd appreciate everybody just having their camera on for the physical vote. You don't have to keep it on for the whole meeting, but we would appreciate that, just getting that practice as we approach full board requirements on that. So let's move on to agenda item number 1, which is a presentation on the public bathroom at POPS potential zoning text amendment. We have with us tonight Julie Rosen, who was one of the spearheads of that special working group, and Betty Kay to also present for us. This is much like we had a discussion last month on the Garment District Alliance proposal to do a zoning text amendment. This is a discussion about a possible zoning text amendment. Multiple community board members have been working together on a workforce to come up with some ideas on this, looking for input from the land use committees of Community Board 4, and then we'll have full board thoughts on this, and then it will be recommendations to make to the task force and to the borough board on how to proceed if we wanted to with a zoning text amendment to allow public restrooms and POPs. And with that, I think Julie, Julie or Betty, if you want to introduce yourselves and then go forward.
Hi, Paul. I'm actually here to present the McGraw Hill project.
Okay, no, Julie Chu. Sorry, Julie Rosen.
Thank you. Okay.
Sorry. And you're muted still.
Yeah, Julie, would you like to take the lead and then let me know if you're going to share screen or you want me to figure it out?
Let me see. Do you have it on your desktop already?
Or Janine, do you have it?
The presentation?
Janine, do you have it in your share screen?
I have the presentation if you need me to share it.
Do you have the most updated? Because otherwise I can see the share screen button. It's just I've never used Zoom before, so.
So if you click share screen, you just pick the screen, you get like another window that pops up and you pick the screen that you want to do. Because I'm not sure if I have the most updated, but I can share what I have, if that's okay.
I can give it a try first, but Julie, if you'd like to start the introduction,
I think you got it, Betty. I saw your slides.
Did you really?
Yeah, we don't see it yet. So when you click the share screen button, you'll see the other window pop up that has all your other windows that are open. You choose the window that has your presentation. And when you click that, we'll all see it.
Oops. I'm completely not getting it.
Janine, do you have it? Why don't we just go with one we haven't? And then Betty and Julie, if there are any variations from the presentation that you've sent to us, you can make note of it.
I will. I just don't know how I lost.
It's all right. We can go with this one. This is the one that we have in our Dropbox, and this is what we've seen already. So
Because it's changed since then, but
It's a PDF, Janine. You can't make it bigger. Well, can someone send it to Janine that she can put up the new one?
okay, you weren't given the link.
No, if you email it to me, I'll download it and then I can pull it up.
Okay, well, let me try.
Betty, there's.
Yep, we can see your screen. We just don't see the presentation. So if you bring up the presentation now, we'll be able to see it. Perfect.
That's it. You got it, Betty.
Thank you. I'm more amazed than anyone else. Anyway, Julie, if you'd like to start with an introduction, since you're really the lead and founder of this group.
Oh, did you want to flip through to that? I think you have an intro slide about the task force, right?
Yes, in 2021, because I'm Betty Kay, I'm from Community Board 1 here in Manhattan. But a public restroom working group was created in 2021 and currently has members from CB1, CB4, CB5, CB6, and Queens CB2. Julie was the creator of the group and still really leads and organizes us all. So she's the real authority. I don't know why I'm speaking, but anyway, and the bottom line is we need more access to public bathrooms. Julie, would you like to add anything?
No. Well, I did start in 2018 with the Urban Design Forum we did a bathroom study with a data scientist. So there's a lot of research in this study. I'm going to forward you guys the booklet that we created in the chat.
Okay, but Julie, would you mind introducing yourself to us to start? So people know who you are. And
sure.
Thank
Julie
you.
Chu, I'm an architect working on affordable housing and the vice chair for budget city services at Manhattan CB5. We, as Betty said, we started this task force early last year and have been meeting about different topics about public bathrooms.
Actually, it was 2021 because I went back and looked at my calendar for 2022 and that was like the third or fourth meeting.
All right, let's proceed.
Anyway, some of the things we found, some considerations for restrooms, because conversations in the past brought up the issue of, what we're aware of and looking at in general, more background to today's talk. So for we need more restrooms and toilets that are needed, including those for ADA compliant access, gender neutral restrooms, changing tables for infants and toddlers, 24/7 access, or at least extended hours are some of the biggest problems. Signage that provides the location, the hours, and what features are available, also in short supply in New York City. Clear responsibility for maintenance to ensure cleanliness and good repair is a huge problem that we've still got to take on. A way to report any problems to responsible parties in real time, and safe environment for users were seen as some of the biggest issues. So what is the status of public restrooms? Where are they? Julie's group had found there are 1,103 public bathrooms in New York City, as you can see, spread throughout the 5 boroughs. And this is for all the visitors, the workers, and the residents, as well as the 3,675 unsheltered people living on the streets of New York City. So the number is really minuscule. In fact, by a very stark comparison, the United Nations standard for refugee camps is 1 toilet for every 20 people. And it's not a surprise if you look at the 311 complaints for public urination, and this isn't even dealing with public defecation, which we get a lot of complaints about at CB1 meetings. But anyway, you can see where the big concentration includes all of our community boards that are south of Central Park, but they're scattered throughout the city. There have been lots of attempts by mayors to handle this problem and a lot of campaigns to deal with trying to get more on the problems. So this is not a new issue, but no one's ever really gotten a handle on it. So I'm hoping to continue some impetus here to finally do something. The 311 complaints about public urination and the protests for more access are just more and more reminders that public restrooms are definitely needed. Right now, the Parks is the biggest provider of public restrooms in New York City. But even with them, only 662 of the 7 parks even have restroom facilities. 129 of them are in Manhattan. But in the 2019 Comptroller's Office report, this was Scott Stringer, they reported that Parks Department bathrooms provided only 16 for every 100,000 residents, which ranked New York City an embarrassing 93rd out of the country's 100 largest cities. And this kind of assumes that we have no visitors, which of course we all know we have a lot of them. Also, of the 662 parks restrooms, 11% are not open year-round, so not available for certain months of the year. Only 31% are ADA compliant. So those of us like me that use mobility scooters or wheelchairs, there's virtually nowhere we can go. And there's a paucity of changing tables or gender neutral options. Other problems. Public bathrooms in the MTA subway stations. Only 78 of the 472 MTA stations have bathrooms. And as you've probably heard, starting this week, about 9 of them may be reopening. We also found the MTA restrooms are widely viewed as unclean, unsafe, and a poor state of repair. So even when they exist, they're still a problem. Public bathrooms are in transportation hubs and automated public toilets, which you can see pictures here. The bottom one is an automated public toilet. Again, you're lucky in that you're closer to the transportation hubs. We down in CB1 in our district, actually we have 2. There is this one on the map, which is the Oculus, but also we have the Staten Island Ferry. Public bathrooms in libraries can be an option, and at least they are now open. Again, the hours are restricted and have their own limitations. And NYPD stations are also counted as options. But as you can see from the first photo, they're not accessible in many cases because of the stairs. The first precinct, I can tell you, where I live is not accessible. I can't get in and out. And then there are also all the problems of people who really don't want to go to a police station to use a public restroom, combined with the fact that they are so pressed for space, they're not that pleased about sharing them as well. So there are limitations. But we have been working with especially the Manhattan Borough President's Office, and there has been some legislation to increase access to public restrooms in New York City. The first one was Intro 258A, which was actually enacted in November 27th of last year. This will require the DOT and the Parks Department to submit a joint report identifying at least one location in each New York City zip code tabulation area, because there are over 42 zip codes that only have a building, commercial building in them. And so those are going to be excluded by this law. Accessibility and safety measures are also going to be included in this report, but they have to come up with some suitable locations for installing public bathrooms. Again, we're not terribly optimistic because of the shortage of staff and the reduction of funding for this, but hopefully we'll start to gather some data by the end of this year from this piece of legislation. Another piece of legislation that's still pending, and this again is Manhattan Borough President's Office, but along with Council Member Rita Joseph, will require the Department of Parks and Recreation, in collaboration with other agencies that maintain public bathrooms, to inspect and issue a report on the public bathrooms every 6 months. This is critical because I know it came up at CB1. Where's the data to tell us where they are and how many? And the fact is, it doesn't exist. This will be the first time that these agencies actually have to put together a list. We've also learned from DOT, because I'm head of the Transportation Committee, but also from Parks, they tend to put forward requests on their capital budget. But if you ever look at the expense budget, which I know the districts do every year, these departments do not tend to put bathrooms down or those expenses. They use public-private partnerships instead. And that explains some of the very poor repair that you see in the public bathrooms held by city agencies. So improving access to public restrooms at the needed scale will need to be multifaceted and include public-private partnerships. That's become very apparent to us. As you can see, the working groups come up with a whole bunch of recommendations. And you can see this is third from the bottom, where we're going to urge the DCP to include public bathrooms as a required amenity in the zoning requirements for POPs that are larger than 10,000 square feet. But there are a lot of initiatives. This is just one of them. As far as public bathrooms go in POPs, only 14 of the 550 POPs currently provide public restrooms. And we feel that this really is a missed opportunity. And you can also see how they're distributed in clusters. So most of the city doesn't even benefit from these anyway, which is unfortunate. So although there can be increases in bulk of up to 20% for the developers, in exchange for providing a plaza, are we asking enough is kind of the question that we're dealing with for the public rights. And in fact, neither the New York City Building Code nor the New York City Zoning Resolution include any requirements for public bathrooms in POPs. This makes toilets and changing facilities unavailable where they are greatly needed. As you can see, we started to look, there are some POPs, and I guess, Julie, you must have put this together. Am I correct?
Yeah, this is the database for the 14 POPs that do have public bathrooms. And we found that.
Yeah. No, I say most of them are in Midtown. There are just 2 down in my district.
So
just a note for everybody, just a quick note for everybody. If it's hard to see this, but there's only one in the 4th Community Board District, and that is at One Worldwide Plaza.
Thank you. Julie, did you?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that if you look through this list, most of them are indoor POPs or covered POPs. So it makes sense where there's access to bathrooms because they're already part of the commercial building. And we did speak to Frank Ruchata from the ECP, who's the director of zoning, back in 2018 when we were looking into access to bathrooms for POPs. And he noted that most of these 14 bathrooms were created in the 1980s. He thinks that something was going on at DCP that was encouraging developers to provide these bathrooms.
Yes, and I want to say now community boards have to kind of fill some of that void. But yeah, this was because a request, people wanted to know when were these various POPs created. And in fact, the amount is leveling off, and I can't see the bottom of my screen. But nevertheless, there have been some changes, and Julie, if you want to address that from 1970.
One question that came up in our meeting last week was how many POPs would be created in the future. And just in CB5 alone, where we have the East Midtown rezoning, they cited that at least 16 new POPs would be created just for that area. The POPs resolution zoning text has been changed multiple times since the 60s to provide new requirements. Another thing that came up was that POPs do have to come back to community boards for recertification, and CB5 for the past few years have been asking them for access to bathrooms whenever they do show up as an applicant. So here we're taking a little bit more formal approach where we noticed that for, a lot of them have open air cafes and food kiosks. And that's when we asked them, with those restaurants, would they open up their bathrooms to the public? And trying to hear what the applicants, there's definitely hesitation in our experience.
Julie, do you want to mention the one place that you had that the POPs was out of compliance, and now in coming in compliance, they actually volunteered bathroom access?
Well, do you want to go through this? Because
Sure.
I just want to mention the thesis of why we're looking at POPs, because there's
Sure.
this window of opportunity where right now POPs over 10,000 square feet are required to provide some additional amenities, and one of those is a food amenity. That's a zoning text requirement. So we saw that as an opportunity to have that bathrooms would go hand in hand. If they have to provide access to food, does it make sense for them to also provide access to bathrooms? This is something we wanted to raise with you.
Yeah, so you'll see the additions here under kiosks, as well as with open air cafes where they exist in a POPs, that they give access to public restrooms. Again, it give access to, it's not build one. To require a food kiosk is included in the public plaza. The qualifying bathrooms would be associated with the kiosk inside the same or nearby commercial building or in the public plaza.
So I'm not sure if this is clear, but the red text that you see are proposed modifications to the zoning text right now. So there's a lot of text under kiosks and open air cafes for requirements for the developers. And here's one additional line item that we wanted to throw in and get people's feedback, as well as DCP.
Yes, because again, the potential options were access to existing, modified, or new restrooms, access to restrooms in a restaurant that's associated with the open air cafe or the kiosk in some cases, and standalone units, which again could build off some of the legislation that's going to go through with what the DOT starts to recommend. So again, Julie, if you want to go through some of the zoning text amendment suggestions, which, as she said, already told you, are those that are in red and underlined.
All right, we have another document that shows the text under each of these sections. So under 37,748 right now, public plazas greater than 10,000 square feet are required to provide a food amenity. So we're just adding to that, saying that if they include a food service, they must also include public restroom access as one of the 3 additional required amenities. And this is actually, we think, low-hanging fruit, because we're just asking for access to an existing bathroom in the building. That's the lowest. If they want, and some developers do, they build a brand new bathroom in one of the covered POPs. And we've seen that at 550 Madison. That's been in the news. I don't know if that's the AT&T building. Some of you may be familiar. Snowhetta was the one that designed the new public space there, and it has a beautiful gender neutral bathroom under one of the hills.
Do you want to talk about the new section 2 on public restrooms? Because there wasn't one, of course.
Yeah, so there's a list of, water features, whatnot, under the additional amenities. And so we created a new item, which is public bathrooms. And then the 3 items, 1, 2, and 3, you can see those are the 3 options, whether it's associated with a commercial building, whether it contains food service in a kiosk or open air cafe. And then what I mentioned before, that the existing 14 POPs are part of indoor pedestrian POPs. So one of the options is that if it's an indoor POP, we're asking them for access to public bathrooms because the proximity to existing bathroom in the building is so close that it might be an easy way for them to provide this amenity.
Yes, and again, the number of fixtures being required would be based on the occupant load of a particular public space.
Yeah, I'm not sure if Varen joined the committee meeting tonight, but he's part of our task force, and he was the one that proposed this actually. Right now, the zoning resolution, the building code, there's no requirements for the occupant load for a public space, right? If you go into the plumbing code, you determine the number of bathroom fixtures by the occupant load of the space. But outdoor space right now, it's not defined, there's no ratio. But at least for indoor POPs, because there is already in the building code a way to calculate that occupant load, we think that's important for them to actually utilize the occupant load of those indoor POPs to create the right number of fixtures for that space.
Oops, sorry. You want to explain why public restrooms were also added? That's another section. It's so good to have an architect who understands this better.
So we created a new section, just public restrooms, not sticking this under the additional amenities section, because we wanted to just spell out hours of operation, signage requirements, typical things that, would be important for the developers to follow. We've noticed when we visited some of these POP bathrooms that they're locked, sometimes, and you have to go ask the security guard to open it. Sometimes the security guard will push back and won't let you use it. So we want a sign that says it's open to the public with the hours of operation.
Yes, any other comments on that? Again, we'd like the restrooms unlocked for the hours of food service, which it sort of says, but it would be desirable if they could be unlocked for all of the hours that the plaza is accessible. And so they all have varying hours. Julie, any final comments? Also, that the building owner should be responsible, because again, it's one of the problems we've had with public toilets in general is that nobody takes responsibility for having to maintain or repair. Yeah, and Dolores, if you'd like to speak up.
Well, I would, hold on one second.
Yeah.
I would, Betty and Julie, what I'd like to do is have you guys wrap up the presentation.
Sure.
And we'll open up for questions from the committee. So I think you only have 1 or 2 slides left. So why don't we try to get through the remaining slides, and then I'll open up for committee questions.
Okay, yes, just to put it in some context, I'd read, because I read an article where someone was complaining about 311 and saying that in fact, food service in New York with 20 or more seats and opened after 1977, which includes a lot of the POPs, must provide a toilet for its customers. So keep in mind, it's food service establishment. So what all these terms mean, it questions why wouldn't the POPs have to include some kind of bathroom? It's not inconsistent, at least. Thought that was kind of interesting for context. So the Public Restroom Working Group is seeking support to pursue the development of text amendments related to the restrooms in public plazas, including POPs, or to support the suggested amendments ideas. The reason I raised this, because it came up in a joint call, your chairs was certainly on. CB1 actually passed in committee only, which is why it says draft. Full committee doesn't meet until the end of the month. What was a little bit of a surprise to me was that they support the development of a text amendment or amendments, because we have so many sections to it, to add and in some cases require public restrooms as an amenity for public plazas. And ask the Department of City Planning to be open to amending the text for public plazas so that public restrooms are included as an amenity that would enhance the public realm. And it also encourages Manhattan Borough President Mark Levine and our council member, who happens to be Christopher Marte, to support efforts to get more public restrooms associated with public plazas, including in POPs and in arcades. And this was the chair of CB1, who's Tammy Meltzer, was very interested in getting some support rather than just a letter from the chair that she could take forward to Borough Board. And they did not have enough information, they felt, to speak to specifics about the text amendment. So Julie, I know, has a slightly different approach for CB5. If you'd like to say something.
Julie, you're muted.
Sorry about that. So we still have to touch base with Layla, our chair, for the land use committee, but she likes to be a little bit more specific in her resos. And I think we like to be mention some of the specific requirements, such as POPs over 10,000 square feet that provide a food amenity that we propose that they provide access to public bathrooms.
Yes, and again, CB1 intends to do that later as it's written, but wanted, as I said, there was a push to get this on the radar of Mark Levine and Christopher Marte to help get those levels to move it forward. So,
Great. I think that was the end of your. Yeah. Thank you, Betty and Julie. This is great. Everybody, you can see a lot of work has gone into this proposed zoning text amendment. The two members from Community Board 4 who were mentioned are David Warren and Varen Bernhardt, who are on this task force with the other members. The process is clearly just at the outset. You know, a zoning text amendment takes, as we all know, a lot to get through that process. So I think what we're trying to do here is to say, you know, in Community Board 1, in District 1 and in District 5, they have different issues than we have here in District 4. So if there's going to be a citywide zoning text amendment on public restrooms at POPs, what are some of our issues that we would want to make sure are incorporated into any language like that? So Leslie's hand go up first, and then Dolores. So anybody else with comments and thoughts? Leslie?
Well, Betty and Julie, thank you so much for the presentation. I have a question. Earlier, you mentioned that libraries were included as a location, but what about CUNY and SUNY and colleges and the like? Are they also under consideration? And also city offices? Or
Yes,
state offices?
I think Gail Brewer, she did a bathroom count and she did include the municipal buildings, and that was after we released our bathroom report. But for CUNY and those schools, I would imagine you need a school ID to go into those buildings, no?
Well, I'm wondering if there's some sort of when they do rebuild and they do constantly do changes, that can be structured so that there's an entrance where people could enter without showing ID. I just asked the question, that's all.
yeah, no, that's an interesting one. And in fact, I had brought that up with the public school system. Because why couldn't they, especially when planning them, have some public toilets that are near the security guards in the entrance? So they don't have to mix with the children. I can tell you about the city buildings because CB1 meets at the municipal building. And I can tell you, I go through multiple security guards to be able to get into my office, to the office where we meet. So it wouldn't be very functional. I don't think DCAS security would make it a very viable option, because I have to show the reason why I'm there, and I'm on a list of names. So it sounds great, but it's really not. We've been struggling with it for a while, but we will continue to work on it.
Thanks, Leslie. Good thought. Dolores?
Leslie, I love the idea, and also thinking about other public amenities like hospitals, et cetera, and how they can publicize more that they do actually have bathrooms that are available. And it speaks to the fact that the work that you're doing is being creative around how do we solve a problem that's been age old in this city. So bravo for doing the work, or brava rather for doing the work. But as Paul, you already said on the outset, a text amendment change is a very long road. I can't see any reason why anyone wouldn't be supportive of the concept and also the logic around how you propose the pops and the size, et cetera. But again, I think that it's too early to really jump in and say, let's go for that text amendment, because one size fits all really does create problems for so many different communities based on the type of development that happens there. But I don't know who wouldn't be supportive of trying to get more public bathrooms. And Betty, thank you for at the end mentioning that one of the specifics you're trying to add is where the responsibility lies. And again, I think the concept around the fact that if there's a bonus for a POPs, and then that means that developer would then have to add, if it's over 10,000, a restroom, and they also would have to commit to maintaining it, because one of the issues that we have in any of the small POPs that we have is commitments are made to get the bonus, but it's not spelled out who owns that responsibility. So thank you for the work.
Joe, and then Chris after Joe.
Yeah, well, actually, Dolores, the new POPs the new POPs regulations actually spell it out. Our problem is the old ones like Ballsy Park that were distant and did not spell it out. But I think the access, the maintenance of the restroom is entirely covered under POPs. You just have to say that as they maintain the actual space, they must maintain the adjacent or connected restroom, because that is very clear in the agreement that is signed as part of it. The second thing is any informational signage. You've talked a lot about it being adjacent or in a building adjacent. The informational signage should not just be at the restroom, but in the POP space itself to direct you to where you're going, because that is the disconnect, how you've written this so far. I don't know if occupant load is a functionality of an exterior space. Occupant load is very much about interior space and egress. So I don't think, although Vera mentioned this, that it actually is a standard that can be used. You should look at that a little more carefully. And then the last thing is the zoning text, when you present it, I think we can support this in concept, but when you present it, you would present the whole text showing that which is there and that which is added. We just sort of saw things floating in the air that were added, so it was hard to understand the context and where they fall in it. Like paragraph H was on its own. I'm assuming there's A through G somewhere, right? So it is helpful if you can send that to our board as we get, if this proceeds further, then we can give you specific responses on text modifications when we see it in the full context. But again, thank you for trying to pull this together.
And Joe, I will point out that when we met earlier to preview for this presentation, they do have all of that, and we asked them to condense it so that the slides wouldn't be 47 pages of text.
Sure, but maybe just have that sent separately so we can look at it and get it, that's all.
Yeah, exactly. I agree with the point, but it was us that made that request of them. They do have that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Joe, I can send that along to Jesse. It is quite a long document with all the existing text there.
And I'd be really careful about when you draft something to use the words match or something. Everything in zoning text is super precise and defined. So my general response is we do the zoning text stuff a lot, unfortunately. Sharpening it is the way to go. Otherwise, you'll have city planning run over you like a bulldozer.
Yeah, thanks, we definitely have copy paste from different sections of the zoning text, because I just want to touch base with you on the signage question you had. We do know in our proposed text amendment that the information signage, which every POPs needs to have, include restroom as part of that list of items in that POPs. So once we send you the revised text, you'll be able to see it
But
in
it,
more
but it should
detail.
know if it's distant, it should know where it is.
That's a
Because
good point.
otherwise you're outside, you have no idea where this is. You go to security guard, no, not, you can't use that. As opposed to saying it is located X, Y, or Z.
Yes, I mean,
Well, can I add too that besides the fact that it needs to go on various signage, New York City does not have a logo for public restroom inside the building. So there has been a long call and a need to look at getting New York City to create something that can be placed on the outside of buildings so that people walking down the street can see, in this building, there is access, and then go trace it down from there. Because that is a big missing link that we keep hearing over and over again.
yeah, just to piggyback on Betty's comment, one of the things we didn't show tonight is the community toilet scheme that is in London, where they have retailers open up their bathrooms to the public. So in that scheme, they have a toilet logo that each retailer's put on their storefront. And then just want to touch base on the occupant load question you had, Joe. The plumbing fixtures, I believe, are based on the number of occupants in the space. So to determine the right amount of plumbing that's needed, that's where the occupant load comes in, right? So that's why if you have a pop that's 10,000 square feet, a plaza that's 10,000 square feet, how do you determine the
Because
right amount of
a
toilets?
plaza has multiple uses. It can have planting areas, it can have fountains, it can have other amenities. I think you need to refine that much further in order to make that be functional. Otherwise, 10,000 square feet of a planted area is not, if that's a standard you're trying to use, it doesn't work.
Yeah, no, we totally agree. And that was a conversation we had with Frank at DCP. How do we determine, for example, Central Park, how many bathrooms does Central Park need? So it's a question that we'd like to.
Yeah, it just needs more refinement, that's all.
Thanks, Joe. Chris?
Thank you, co-chair. Thank you for the presentation. Quick question. Having been to a number of cities where there's public right of access to bathrooms at stores and restaurants, why not make that a priority for legislation over zoning text changes? Because that's the easier fix. They're already there. Their doors are open. We don't have to negotiate or wait for a project to be completed 5 or 6 years down the road. If there's an immediate need for it now, and I've seen the 311 numbers to open New York. I was just on my computer reviewing it. There is a real need for it now. Why not just jump in as a community board or as an entire borough and say, if your occupancy for a restaurant or bar or a retail space is this much, then you are obligated to have public bathrooms or have your bathrooms open to the public.
Oh, I can answer that one.
Yeah, go ahead.
In early 2022, the Department of Buildings actually changed the plumbing code to address that very issue and made it that places, restaurants, stores, and others would more or less have to open. In fact, New York state law is that if there are at least 2 employees working and there is a restroom, it must be available to the public that could come in and utilize it. New York City does not enforce New York state law in the first place. But when the plumbing code changed early in 2022, Mayor Adams came out and specifically said, no business has to allow anybody but customers in. So the mayoral interpretation of the law, of the code that was written specifically to try to open, was then shut pretty immediately. And it was in the press a lot in 2022. So if you Google it, you'll find articles about it.
Right. That doesn't. So regardless of the mayor's interpretation of that law, right, he's not a judge. So ultimately, legislation still falls on the city council to say, no, this is our interpretation of state law. This is what it is, and force him to veto it, right, and turn it into a larger thing versus asking the entirety of New York City to subscribe to a text change. right? All you
Yeah,
need
but-
is what, 30 city council members to vote on a law that like stipulates, no, you do have to keep your businesses open if you have like 2 workers or more. Like that's it.
I guess, in my opinion, having retailers open up their bathrooms to the public isn't as easy as it seems. I mean, that's extra maintenance for them, extra, toilet paper costs. There are people coming in that maybe they don't want to come in. Starbucks last year announced that they might close their bathrooms to the public. They were the third space, right, where anybody can use their bathroom. But the CEO cited that because of hardships and mental distress from their staff, they're thinking about closing up their bathrooms to the public. So it's not something.
Is that the case in London as well?
They pay their retailers to open up their bathrooms to the public, and it's a
So City of
program where
London
you
pays
are elected
retailers.
into it.
Okay.
Yeah, and then
okay.
you choose to do it, right? You don't
Okay.
have to.
Got you. So
It's a little bit different.
There's public. Well, see, that's the nuance, right? Is that there's public money to incentivize a partnership.
For sure.
Okay,
And then
okay.
they also get to advertise on a special platform, so it's good for their business. So we have to incentivize the retailers to do it. And this is something
Like
we're
the
really
equivalent-
interested
like
in.
and those platforms are like they're links, like the equivalent of like Links NYC and like the digital screens that are on the tube, right?
Yeah, no, we definitely want to explore it. But the Pops one right now, people ask us why Pops now versus all the menu of bathrooms that is in the city. But this is very specific where we saw a window of opportunity. They're providing, we're giving them a lot of development rights, and they get to put a restaurant in the public space that, is ours. So we're like, can we have a trade-off where we get to use your bathroom, you get to use the public space for your open air cafe? That's where the logic comes in.
Got it. And then last question, because this is not me. This is me taking more information that wasn't in the presentation in, so that way I can, digest it. So this is my last question, if it'll be entertaining. So then, as this is more for the board and this committee, so as this process rolls out, we have more information coming in the 47-page document that we should be receiving in full and reviewing proposals and amendments and things of that nature. Why won't we just, as the Chelsea Land Use and Hell's Kitchen Land Use committees, just adopt that whenever we're negotiating changes in zoning or developments that there's public bathrooms? I think we already do that for most of the developments that require that have plaza space or open air spaces. Isn't that right? So can we as a committee just do that like in general?
We can't do it unless, we can ask for it, but we don't always get it unless it's part of the zoning. So this presentation is, as Julie points out, the restrooms working group went through a number of different avenues to pursue and how do we increase the number of public restrooms, and this POPs feature is something that, as Julie points out, sort of like low-hanging fruit. If a 10,000 square foot POPs requires requires food kiosk, why can't we just say require a public restroom? And so if that is the case, the zoning text amendment wants to move forward to adopt regulations on POPs to require public restrooms. I think what we're trying to gather here from us to provide to the working group is what are some of the nuanced issues that we might face here in District 4, so that as Dolores points out, one size does not fit all in zoning text amendments. So as they're drafting language, as they're moving forward, are there concerns that we have that we would want to make sure the working group incorporates into that language so that it has a smoother sailing process as we go through all of the community boards, we go through
respectfully, I understand.
go through all of that.
So
that's what we're trying to
whole presentation.
accomplish
I understand the goal. I'm asking for this committee that we just make it a common practice and continue to push forward for public access to restrooms, as we do on parks as well. That was it.
That's fine, but that is a separate discussion, I think, from the discussion about this zoning text amendment and whether or not we can.
I know. I'm adding another layer to the conversation. That's
okay.
All.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah.
And I also, JD, I see your hand just went up. I just want to add that Brian Weber did send a note one of his issues is that the pops close to him, there's a lot of illicit activity that occurs in these pops because, as Joe had mentioned, the requirements for maintenance and safety and public safety concerns aren't always well addressed in the manifestation of these pops. And so to make sure that any zoning text amendment would incorporate some language to make sure that there's public safety issues addressed at these pops and notably in these restrooms. So that was a comment from one of our other members. And I personally had a few thoughts earlier, but I wanted to let JD have a few words and then I'll talk.
I just want to suggest somebody from the committee could make a motion along the lines of this needs further study. We encourage further study, and here are some of our concerns.
Right. I was gonna ask that motion after discussion.
Can't make it, so.
Yeah, I was gonna ask for that after we finish discussion, JD.
Well,
because I have a couple of issues I wanted to raise, and then there are a number of people from the public here, and I want to see if any public members had any other attendees wanted to add any input. One of the thoughts that I had, this is this language looks at if you're a 10,000 square foot pop that requires a food kiosk, a food restaurant of some sort, that it should incorporate a public restroom. I had some thoughts about why not some of the smaller ones incorporating public restrooms, like a 5,000 square foot pop could have a restroom even if it doesn't have a food kiosk of some sort. So I don't know if that's something that is worth consideration. The other thing, there is a sort of a question about retroactivity. Julie mentioned that these pops come in for recertification, and one of the things that is happening is that in the recertification process, we're saying put in a public restroom, and whether or not that should be a requirement in the zoning text amendment of any recertification, or if it's something that, as Chris just pointed out, when somebody comes in for a recertification, we can push for it. And so some consideration about retroactivity of existing pops. And then another concern I had was on, as we know in Hudson Yards, there's open space requirements. If they turn that into pops, they put in a kiosk, it takes up square footage of the public space. Is that a significant concern to people? And the consumption of open space to create restrooms, and if that's a concern to anybody. So those are some of the questions I had for the committee as well. And Bob, I know that you probably have dealt with this a lot. And I haven't heard from you if you have any other thoughts on that. Dolores.
I entertain a motion to say that we appreciated the presentation. We recognize this is a work in progress, and in concept, we're supportive of more public bathrooms, but do need to explore some of the nuances of the suggested text amendments, but generally support the exploration moving forward.
Second.
Excellent. I don't see any hands up. I don't see any hands up in the public.
With some of the concerns that were raised today.
Okay. Yes, and pointing out some of the suggestions from Leslie, the point from Chris, Paul, your 3 points, etc.
Excellent.
No one from the public has a hand raised, Paul.
No, I don't see any. Thanks, Joe. Great. All right. Bob, I saw your camera come on. Did you want to speak or just to vote?
No, I'm fine. Your comments are fun. We maintain a bathroom in the bar. It's a lot of work.
Yeah. I thought you would have, might have some concerns from that side of the coin. Great. So we have a motion on the floor. Any more discussion on the motion? Anybody opposed to the motion? I don't see any opposition. Therefore, I'm going to say that this motion passes unanimously. All right. Betty and Julie, thank you so much. Great work. A lot of hard work on this. We'll now move on to agenda item number 2. I know that Julie Rosen is here from the McGraw Hill team. Janine, if you want to pull in the other folks. I apologize at the beginning of the meeting. I had a bit of a brain freeze. This McGraw Hill thing is going to be led by JD. But before we continue on, a few members have joined since the introductions. So I just want to point out that David Solnick's with us, Bob Infato is with us, and Joe Restuccio is now with us as well. JD.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Welcome, McGraw-Hill team. I guess, Julie, you're leading us, the McGraw-Hill building. For everybody who knows, on 42nd Street. Raymond Hood and Andre Foulihu were the designers, 1930-31. New York City landmark, 1979, I believe. National Historic Landmark of the US, and most importantly, a Hell's Kitchen landmark. It's a wonderful building. We met with Julie, your team. I believe it was 2021, correct me if I'm wrong.
That's correct.
There was some restoration. The exterior is what is landmarked, not the interior, but the exterior. We had, I thought, a very thorough, respectful conversation, and we very much appreciated your taking our concerns into consideration. And I think you're back for some modifications, not to change any of those agreements that were made about the restoration back in 2021, but just some modifications, because there is a new post-COVID concept for this wonderful building, and we're eager to hear about it. So Julie, Paul, do you have any comment before I turn it over to Julie?
No,
about the conversion, being converted to
no, wait till after the presentation.
Okay, great. So
Thanks,
the idea is to convert it, or the top floors anyway, to residential. So this is an interesting, and we hope we have a fruitful conversation. Julie, if you can introduce your team, and welcome.
Great, thanks so much, Judy. And is it okay if I go ahead and share my screen with the presentation?
It's up to Jenny.
Yes, you can share your screen.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. I'll just pull that up and then I'll proceed with the team introductions just to make sure that everyone can see this. Okay. Is that showing up for you all? Okay, wonderful. Great. So good evening, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. I'm Julie Rosen from Higgins, Quaysbarth and Partners Preservation Consultants. And we have a few team members here as well tonight who will be available for questions after the presentation. And I'd just like to introduce them by name up front. We have Gerard Nacera from Resolution Real Estate, Dan Shannon and Tricia Ebner from MDAS Architects, Valerie Campbell from Kramer Levin, Eldad Gothel from Kassir, and Gloria Glass from SLCE Architects. And just to get everyone on the same page, JD, I might just kind of say a few things that you already introduced, but just within the larger context. So we are here this evening presenting a modified scope of work for the McGraw-Hill building, which is located at 330 West 42nd Street. And it is an individual landmark and a very significant example of the international style. It was designed by Raymond Hood in 1931 for the McGraw-Hill Publishing Company. And just a little bit about the location. It is a through block building located at the south side of 42nd Street between 8th and 9th Avenues, and it runs through block to 41st Street. The committee did see this building 2 years ago in January of 2021, exactly 2 years ago, when this same project team presented a proposal for some alterations at the exterior of the building, which included modifications to the West 42nd Street main entrance, at the West 41st Street ground floor infill, and also to replace doors at the upper terraces. And in response to some concerns raised by the community board, by this committee, the owner of the building did agree to retain those beautiful McGraw-Hill signs at the top of the building. And those are actually kind of part of the inspiration for some of the ground floor scope that I'm going to present in just a little bit. And as a result of those discussions in 2021, we did receive a unanimous approval from CB4 for the proposed alterations. We also know that CB4 subsequently sent a letter to LPC asking that LPC designate the interior lobby. However, because the lobby had been substantially altered in the early 1980s, LPC reaffirmed its earlier 2015 decision that the lobby did not meet the criteria for interior designation, and therefore a judicial challenge was dismissed. However, the owner was able to proceed with the approved interior demolition work, but all of the original intact materials that were still in the lobby were salvaged for installation into the new lobby. All of the LPC approved work, including what you saw in 2021, is part of a large overall program to restore and upgrade this landmarked office building, which for the last decades has been plagued by high vacancy rates. And since 2021, the owner has already initiated much of the restoration work on the exterior of the building, and they're well along with some of the interior renovations and structural upgrades and infrastructure upgrades that are all part of the overall rehabilitation project. However, even with all of these improvements, it has still become apparent that it's going to be incredibly difficult to lease the entirety of the building to commercial tenants in this depressed post-COVID office market. And so in order to ensure the long-term vitality of the building and the preservation of all the components, the owner is proposing to convert just the upper floors of the building to residential use while retaining the lower floors for commercial use. And as you know, LPC does not regulate the use of buildings, but they are regulating some of the exterior alterations that are being proposed in order to accommodate this new mixed use of commercial and residential uses. So we are asking for an amendment to the existing certificate of appropriateness, and we're laying out the proposals for you up front, just because we do want to make sure that these are included in your resolution, and I'll be going through all of these in more detail. But we're focusing on modifications at the 42nd Street storefront, including a new building entrance for residential entry with a new marquee and an increased entry door height. We're creating a new commercial entry at one of the existing storefront bays. And we're also, in a really exciting move, restoring some of the McGraw Hill signage that's been missing from the building for many, many decades. Up at the terraces on 2 floors, 16 and 32, which are aligned with new residential floors, we're also proposing new terrace doors and new terrace partitions. But before we get into the proposal, I just wanted to give you a quick update of where we've been since 2021. So in addition to the certificate of appropriateness that was previously granted, LPC has also issued a number of staff level permits for an extensive scope of storefront restoration, mechanical work, and interior work. And there are also some additional facade repairs at the upper floors that are forthcoming. And I just wanted to point out a couple of the detail photos on the lower part of this page. You may all recall these massive mechanical units that were all of the setback terraces on 41st and 42nd Street. Those have all been removed, really just opening up the building, making all of the details much more visible. And in addition, this lower right photo here, this is a detail view of the deteriorated status of the aluminum panels at the base of the building. The storefront was severely deteriorated, and ownership is investing a lot of time and resources into a full restoration of the base of the building. So over $35 million have been invested on the restoration part of the project, and another $100 million have been expended on new windows and electric and plumbing, in addition to all of the other work that's happening here. And we just wanted to provide a full list of scope updates for you so you can see where we are with construction progress. We also just wanted to share that the new infill in the entrance that was previously proposed for 41st Street, which was really part of a reactivation of the ground floor of the rear facade of the building, essentially. This is still part of the project, and we are not proposing any changes to this design. So the current project envisions this exciting adaptive reuse of the building, and it's going to convert the upper floors, so it's floors 12 through 34, to residential use. And these are the floors shown here in yellow. And these floors have smaller floor plates, which can accommodate residential apartments on either side of a central corridor. Approximately 224 rental apartments would be created on these floors, and the layouts are going to accommodate studio and 1-bedroom units with work from home areas that are going to be planned into the unit designs. Interestingly, these upper floors are uniquely adaptable to this residential use because they were originally designed to house the McGraw Hill offices with more access to natural light than on the lower, deeper floor plates, which were intended for manufacturing and printing uses. And so the floors in red here, floors 1 through 11, will remain commercial, and we're retaining that retail space along the 42nd Street frontage as well. I did want to note that as a result of this use change, some of the modifications that were previously proposed for the central lobby are going to be much less extensive than were originally proposed, and the volume of the lobby is no longer going to change. So to get into the current proposal in a little bit more depth, we have 2 sheets of elevations here. On the left is what was previously approved for the scope of work throughout the building, and on the right is our new proposal. And again, we're just focusing on the 42nd Street ground floor, and it terraces on floors 16 and 32. This is the 42nd Street elevation and the 41st Street elevation here. So starting on 42nd Street, we started by looking at the history of changes at the main entrance to the building. And what we found is that there was this very prominent McGraw Hill signage above the main entrance that slowly but surely over the decades started to be removed piecemeal. Now, these 3 photos were all pre-designation conditions. Again, you can see the lower band of address signage was removed by the 60s. And then once McGraw Hill moved out of the building and GHI, which was an insurance company, moved in, they replaced the signage. And there were already changes, but by the time this current project started, as you can see in the photo on the upper right, there was no signage left. The entrance was very empty. And so as part of this project, we are looking back to the original condition for inspiration and restoration. Overall elevation of the ground floor of the building. This was the previous condition when we first came to the project. And then here's an elevation of what was previously approved for the building. Now, what this committee reviewed in 2021 were new entrance infill at the main entrance at the center of the building, and the installation of a new address at the sign band above the ground floor. All of the other work shown here, including storefront restoration and new storefront infill, has all been approved by Landmarks at staff level. The storefront infill is per the storefront master plan, which was approved in 2019. That includes new infill and this band of retail signage above. And then the storefront restoration is an extensive repair and replacement of deteriorated metal elements. And we're also going to be restoring the original colors of the ground floor metal elements, which have not been their original colors for a very long time. And the proposed scope here are really about small modifications that are going to provide the access needs for the new uses, the residential and commercial uses combined. And they're also going to provide important wayfinding installations for workers, residents, and visitors to the building. And it's really important to have the 2 entrances on 42nd Street since it is the primary frontage. Again, 41st Street has always been the backside of the building. So the new center entry is going to become the residential entrance. We are proposing a height increase of the entry doors by 10 inches, just to provide a little bit more openness for the residential entry. All of the details will match what were previously approved. We're just raising the height a little bit. We're also proposing the installation of a new projecting cantilevered marquee, again, to provide some weather protection and some additional wayfinding for this entrance. Above the entry doors, we are restoring the original McGraw Hill signage. We are matching the details and the colors and the dimensions of the historic, and we're also reinstating the address and the sign band below the letters. I'll show you more details a little bit later on. We can go into more detail there. In the rightmost storefront bay here, this is the westernmost bay, we are modifying an existing storefront bay, a retail bay, for use as a new commercial entry. And so we've designed new bronze infill, which is really a modification of the master plan design, but modified to include enough entry doors and a little bit of extra height to accommodate the pedestrian flow into that space. And we're also proposing a new address above that commercial entry in place of actual retail tenant signage. And here we have an approved versus proposed elevation for comparison. So just to talk a little bit more about the change of use. In the approved design, we were situating the commercial lobby in the center with retail on either side. There were 5 entry points at 42nd Street proposed, and we are retaining those same 5 entry points, but just reconfiguring the uses a little bit. So we'll have the residential entry in the center. There will be a commercial entry at the far westernmost bay, and then the 3 other entries will provide access to the retail spaces. All of the bay dimensions, all of the door setbacks will remain consistent with the existing approval. So a couple of renderings just to really show you what this will look like. So this is the main entry, again, with the restorative McGraw Hill signage and the address above the marquee. At the bronze entry doors, we are proposing to retain the same details as the proposed, but increasing the height from 8 foot 2 inches to 9 feet, again, just to get a little bit more openness there. The bronze cantilevered marquee is meant to reflect some of the detailing of the historic storefront banding with those slim bands, alternating proportions, and also to reinforce the horizontality of the entirety of the ground floor. The marquee design is intended to be a contemporary design that will stand apart from the historic building, but will also reflect some of those important design elements that Raymond Hood integrated. And now looking from the west at the new office entry, again, this is a modification of a storefront bay. So the design intent here was really a reflection of the typical storefront typologies, mimicking the very open nature of these bays, the glassiness with the bronze framing in order to maintain the rhythm of the ground floor expression. All of the new elements will be bronze, just like the historic components, to create consistency and compatibility throughout the ground floor. And I did also want to mention up front that both of these entrances will be fully accessible. They will have ADA push buttons at both entrances to provide full access. As part of the design process, we also looked back at historic precedent. So we first looked at Art Deco buildings in Midtown that are now individual landmarks to see what else was happening in the city at the time that the McGraw Hill building was constructed. And what we found is that many architects were employing the use of marquees, particularly very linear design marquees, in order to emphasize and draw attention to the main entrances. And these were even used at recessed entries and at entries that included other decorative components as a way to really focus the pedestrian to where they should go into the building. Of particular note, we were interested to see that Raymond Hood, as shown in the lower right here, used some of the same elements that we're proposing for McGraw Hill in his Daily News building on East 42nd Street, including a projecting marquee immediately over the main entry doors in combination with other decorative materials. We also looked back at what LPC has approved over the last several years in terms of new entrance infill and marquees, particularly when an adaptive reuse proposal is part of a project. And so I wanted to draw particular attention to the Woolworth Building, Waldorf Astoria, and Starrett Lehigh examples, which again are 3 individual landmarks that underwent similar adaptive reuse proposals for conversions to multiple uses. At Woolworth and Waldorf, it was also a residential commercial mix. At Starrett Lehigh, it was about multiple different commercial uses, but the idea is that landmarks over the years has been approving similar modifications to add canopies and new entrances in order to meet access needs for different uses. The other examples on these sheets are also showing different contemporary canopy additions at individual landmarks and modifications of storefront infill to create new entrances. So going through some details, I'm probably going to move through these pretty quickly. Absolutely happy to come back if anyone has any questions. But for the 42nd Street main entry, the new residential entrance, we were constantly looking back at the historic because it was really important to the team to bring back some of those historic details that had been lost from the building in order to recenter the ground floor. And so that's where the restoration of the McGraw Hill signage really creates an important, it reinstates an important detail here. And again, creates much more emphasis on the center of the building as it was always intended to be. So flipping through, we have comparisons between the historic details, the approved condition, and then the proposed. And again, between the approved and the proposed, we're talking about signage restoration. We're talking about raising the entry door height by 10 inches, still creating alignments with the surrounding banding of the storefront piers, but just getting a little bit more height and openness, and then adding a projecting marquee. We do have some marquee details showing an RCP, a section, and an elevation. There will be some integrated strip lighting within the perimeter of the marquee. The outer edge, as you can see in the rendering here, will be bronze with that strip detail articulation. The top will be glazed to allow light to still come in and enter the vestibule and the lobby. And there will also be some downlight fixtures towards the back of the marquee just to provide a little bit of extra lighting, as well as a linear uplight at the top to shine some light on the upper part of the recessed entry. I did also just want to note that we are proposing some signage at the side of the marquee. Those will be 7-inch high letters, fairly small, but just again, really important perpendicular wayfinding as pedestrians are accessing the building from the south side of 42nd Street. Looking at the comparative signage changes here, again, comparing historic with approved and proposed. The idea here is that our proposed design is reflecting the historic, matching the colors, the typeface, and the height. The only change here is that because we're now incorporating addresses for 2 different uses, the residential entry is going to become 328 West 42nd Street. So it's just a numerical differentiation from the historic, but the other details will reflect the historic. Looking at the commercial entry, we have the approved design on the left. Again, this is the design that has been approved at staff level at Landmarks as per the existing storefront master plan, with double doors, glazed display windows on either side, and then retail in the transom signage band. And our proposed design, we are going to a 4-door opening. That's to accommodate the number of pedestrians to meet flow requirements for the new commercial entry. But really, this is about creating alignments with the surrounding banding, allowing the glassiness to remain, and then replacing the retail signage placeholder with the address for the commercial entry, which is 330 West 42nd Street. We are also proposing a stanchion with an ADA push button to provide the accessibility, the barrier-free access to this entry as well. So we have approved versus proposed details. Also wanted to mention that we are proposing a very slight projection above the entry of 10 inches that will have the offices in 6-inch letters, again, for wayfinding and just to provide a little bit of extra articulation to this bay so that it is differentiated from the storefront bays, but we are retaining the setback. We're retaining that 3-foot setback of the approved in the proposed, so that again, we're retaining that rhythm and that consistency as you move along the ground floor, and then a comparison of the retail versus address signage. Again, the signage will match the approved typology, colors, and height as in the master plan. Moving to the terraces, this committee saw an approval for new terrace, a proposal for new terrace doors at upper floors. The prior scope that we reviewed with you was for new doors in existing door locations. And so that was in locations such as this shown on the left, and the approved design is shown on the right. The new proposal incorporates this same design. We're not proposing any changes to the actual door design. We are simply asking for additional door locations at 2 terraces at 16 and 32. Now, in order to install those new doors, we will need to modify existing window openings. So that's what this photo in the middle is. These are existing windows. They're non-historic. Over the last 10 or 15 years, there have been kind of iterative window replacement projects throughout the building. So we're not removing any historic windows, These are all contemporary windows. We will need to drop the sills, which means that we're impacting 2 rows of terracotta. And I did want to point out here, you can see differentiation between some light units and some dark units, and just flipping to some overall photos of 16 and 32nd, you can start to see these, again, the differentiations where this lowest band is darker and everything above is lighter. Now, the darkest bands of terracotta are replacements from about 2019. So those are all new units. So we're impacting a minimal quantity of historic terracotta units in order to install these doors. So looking at some overall elevations, we have 16th floor north terrace on the top and south terrace on the bottom. The top elevations in each section are what we have approved so far, which was 1 terrace door on the 16th floor north terrace and 1 on the south. We are now proposing 6 additional doors on the north terrace and 3 additional doors on the south terrace. And this is to make sure that each apartment unit has access to the terrace, and also so that it meets code requirements for access. And then at the 32nd floor, again, we had 1 door approved at the north terrace, 4 at the south, and we are proposing 5 additional doors at the north terrace and 2 additional doors at the south terrace. The only modifications to masonry will be at the sills. Otherwise, the doors will fit into the existing openings. In addition, at the terraces, we are proposing new partitions. These will satisfy a couple of different needs. There are going to be 6-foot partitions aligned with each of the piers. Those are going to be for privacy between terrace units, between apartment units, and those will be set off of the building facade by 6 inches. Then there will be a line of 4-foot tall partitions, which are really going to be about creating a maintenance area within 5 feet of the parapet wall. Everything, again, will be set back from the parapets, from the building, and anchored to the roof slabs. There's no impact to any of the historic fabric at the building. So on the top, we have a terrace plan, and then just a key plan of the 16th floor, so you can understand the relationship to all of the apartment units. And then the section here in the lower left-hand corner showing this 6-foot tall partition set off the building facade, this lower 4-foot section, which is held back 5 feet from the parapet. I did also want to mention there's an existing orange metal railing that exists at all of the terraces. So when I go through the mock-up photos, we have a lot, the orange you're seeing is actually the terraces, and that's the historic color. And those are 3 foot 10 inches above the terrace pavers. We have some mock-ups to show you. We constructed mock-ups at the far east and west corners of the 16th floor north and south terraces, and this was all done in coordination with Landmarks as per their mock-up requirements. And so we did a walk around of the building to confirm visibility of the partitions. Again, everything is held back so far that we weren't expecting any significant visibility, but we wanted to make sure. So I have 5 viewpoints to show you. And again, happy to come back to these if anyone has any questions. But we have extremely limited visibility from the east of the building. These are views looking from 42nd Street between 7th and 8th Avenue. All of the partition visibility is actually seen through the openings in the parapet railing. So we're not getting any increased visibility beyond what is already there. Same thing happens when you're west on 42nd Street, looking east at the building. Everything is actually seen through the slats. You can't even see the partition wall comes about there. You can't even see it because it's behind the railing. Looking north, there's a little bit of an oddity in the street wall between 8th and 9th Avenues. There's a parking lot, and you get this direct view of the north side of the building. And just to pinpoint, so you can see that, you can see the mock-up, this vertical line here with the dark painted side, that is the 6-foot part of the partition. It is visible about the equivalent of 9 inches above the the orange railings. This fits within the landmark staff rules for minimal visibility. The 16th floor is over 200 feet above grade. So we're well within the 36 inches of minimal visibility, but wanted to be sure that we were showing this to you tonight so that we can make sure that we get a resolution for this. Moving to the south and the west, very similar visibility from 39th and 9th Avenue. And then from 38th Street and 10th Avenue, I think this represents pretty much the maximum visibility you get of this building. You do see the entirety of the 16th floor south terrace here, and just little tiny bits of the partitions sticking up above the railing. But again, everything is very, very minimally visible from a very far distance. You need a zoom lens on your camera to see these, and everything will be finished to blend in with the building so that there's no adverse impact to the historic features of the building. So just to wrap up with a summary here of all of the scopes of work that we presented tonight, we can kind of use this as a checklist as we go through. And I did, just before we open it up for questions, wanted to turn it over to Dan Shannon from MDAS, just to see, Dan, if you had anything else that you wanted to add just to wrap up tonight.
Julie, thank you. No, I don't have anything to add. I think you thoroughly represented the work and design effort that the team has undertaken with this, and just reiterate the importance of the conversion and bringing residential to the neighborhood.
Great, thanks, Dan.
Julie, thank you for that thorough presentation and your attention to detail that your team has applied to all this. We very much appreciate it. Before I open it up, I have one clarification. You had to change the address from the normal 330 address. You had to move that west. Is that correct?
Correct. The 330 will be the commercial entry address. Yes.
Okay, I had no choice. Anyway, thank you for that. Will you take some questions from the committee? And I'm going to start with Paul, and then I'll go to Dale, and then Dolores. So, Paul.
Thanks, JD. And I'll echo the praise and thanks for the detail on this presentation. It seems that we're asking some minor modifications and amendments to an existing approval of certificate of appropriateness to accommodate 424 housing units. So, expanding the size of the doors and adding a door up the street. I appreciate the efforts put into this. A couple of clarification points, though, and I know the lobby is not part of this process, but it was a very contentious issue. And you mentioned in your presentation that the owner had restored a lot of the components, that because the residential entrance is now going to be at the center where the main entrance used to be, that there is more opportunity there to bring it back to its former glory. And then how do people associate to the elevators and the elevator banks? So if you could just talk, I know it's not relevant to this discussion, but I think a lot of people are concerned about the lobby. So if we could talk about that for just a minute, that'd be helpful.
Absolutely. Thank you, Paul, for your questions. I did just want to add one clarification. The residential unit numbers will be 224, just in case that ends up in your resolution. But I'd actually like to turn it over to either Dan or Trisha to just go through an explanation of how the interior circulation will work. And I'm happy to, we actually have a slide prepared for you to just show that as well. So I can flip to that.
So it'll be a 2-point thing. Trisha will go through the planning diagram. I want to respond to the design. As Paul said, we're very sensitive to the concern for this historic iconic landmark, and also the issue of the historic fabric that existed in the lobby. All of the historic fabric that we identified has been removed and stored. They are elements of doors and other metal elements, elevator doors, entry doors. And it is our intent and design planning that those components are integrated into the construction of the residential lobby, as well as the commercial lobby throughout the building. And as Julie said, you all might recall from a year ago that our plan for the commercial lobby would have changed the volume and height of that space. The residential lobby will no longer change the height of the lobby. There is no two-story or element up or down to accommodate the various amenity parts. And with that, I'll let Tricia take us through the planning. Thank you.
Okay, so I think Julie touched on it pretty well. The original building as designed by Raymond Hood had a manufacturing base, so it was up to the 8th floor, and then you had an office center portion, and with the top of the building having some of the executive offices. I believe there was a gym, some stuff up top. So that influenced the way that the building and the elevatoring ran through the building. So those 6 elevators you see on the right, on the left side of the plan here, are the elevators that go all the way up into the tower where we are going to be putting the residential units. So the only location for the residential lobby really is at this center point. So you're entering in using the elevators that the yellow area is touching, and then the commercial lobby is going to come in and access the mid-rise elevator bank here that's going to bring everybody up to their floors in an efficient manner.
Thanks, Tricia. Paul, does that kind of answer? Thank you, Paul. We'll go to Dale.
Thanks for that privilege.
Sorry, Paul. Okay.
Yeah, I just said thank you.
Okay, thanks. Dale.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thanks for the presentation. I love this building. And I have to say, like, when we had our office in it, it was always a little bit of a letdown to see the degraded lobby from, you know, from where it was. So, but I love the exterior and all the color scheme, especially, and all the details. So, and I do think that you're kind of deploying a language, like a language that's in the original to like towards this adaptive reuse, as far as like the little changes to the storefront, the terrace doors, the partitions on the terraces, the canopy, etc. A couple of questions. Could the address at the main entrance have remained the address that is best known, and the commercial and entrance address change instead of the other way around?
Tricia, would you like to take that just in terms of?
Yeah, so in terms of wayfinding, we did think about that. It becomes very confusing when people are coming to the 328 to have to pass 330, just in the way the Manhattan streets run. So we made the executive decision to put 328 at the center.
But you're locked into it couldn't have been
Yes.
Oh, you're
the
locked.
Building is between 326 and 330 West.
I see. Okay, I see. Okay.
Yeah.
And then this is just a question I'm curious about, because I know that the panels on the upper floors are like the glazed terracotta, and there's a lot of bronze banding details at the base. What are the color panels? What is the material of the color panels at the base?
They're aluminum.
They're like enameled or anodized aluminum?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, enamel.
Okay. Yeah. And that's the original material, and that's what you're reproducing?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, great. Also, it's funny, I get that the railing was originally an orange color because it like ties in with the signage, but for today's, you know, like with my eyes in 2023, it looks like temporary. It always looks like that temporary, like kind of netting that they do when there's construction. Anyway, also, did you consider a 41st Street entrance for either, like, I guess it would probably be more likely the residential rather than the commercial?
So 41st Street, there's a separate secondary kind of back of house entry that will be used by both, and that was part of the 2021 approval. But that's more of a secondary entry point.
Your feeling is that it's better to have both the residential and the commercial entrance on 42nd Street. Okay.
That's the main primary facade. Yep.
Yeah, I think, oh, and what is the affordability component?
Dale, it's all market rate.
Why isn't there an affordability component?
There's not a requirement in the zoning text.
That wasn't my question.
No, I wanted to clarify just that part of it.
Right.
And other than that, that's the program that we were delivered to by the ownership.
Okay, thanks.
Dale, thank you. Good question about the numbers. I was worrying about that too. Dolores.
First, I just want to say, Julie, you give a great presentation, and I want to thank you and the whole team for the extremely thoughtful way of responding to, from well back before the pandemic, all of the concerns that we raised as a community about some of the changes that you were making. My comments, I have no questions. My comments is that I really love the thoughtfulness that you've put into this use change and having that opportunity to bring back some of the elements that we really wanted. So thank you for a great presentation. And I'm really excited that this building's going to be coming online, and hopefully you're successful with the conversion to the new purpose.
Thank you, Dolores. Joe?
Yeah, again, echoing Dolores, echoing all, a very serious, solid presentation. Is someone getting feedback? No, okay. So some questions. First, a comment to the ownership, especially. You know, we had to work with you very seriously to get rid of 330 West 42nd Street on top of the building, and you've embraced the name McGraw Hill, and we really appreciate that, as you kind of branded your whole project with that. I want to take you to the 41st Street storefront, though, Julie. And we noted in our meeting in January of last year that the Port Authority is rebuilding its entire terminal, and that's going to be a very active street. I would ask that, as opposed to you waiting and coming back with yet another amendment to this plan, the owner consider looking at making the entrance to that storefront space appropriate today and just getting it over with. That is going to be a very, very active street. The Port Authority plans are moving quite ahead. We'll be reporting upon them later. And I think it's a mistake not to take advantage of that now. Could you give me a response on that first? And I have another comment.
Dan, would you like to speak? That?
Thank you for that comment. I would think that ownership would have to respond to their sense of making a change based on that future. And we all share, Joe, your optimism.
I'm okay. I gotta tell you, Dan, I'm not optimistic. I sit on a working group for the past number of years. The project is funded. The project is breaking ground.
And we agree. That's why we did focus in creating a interior garden space for the occupants of the building on that side, and replaced it with the storefront with glass. That is the plan right now. That was approved, and we certainly appreciate that. And I look forward to seeing those plans. We have not been directed by ownership to reevaluate 41st Street, though.
I will be adding in our letter tonight that you evaluate that and make that change at this point in time, because in fact, it is short-sighted not to do that.
And Joe, as ownership here, what is it that you're asking for?
You have a single door as opposed to a regular storefront door. And as you've made changes in the front to make it more accessible, that makes sense to say this will end up being, Gerard, quite a nice place to have a commercial business. And they're going to want more than a single leaf of a door. That's all.
Understood. You know, and I'm glad that the changes may be coming to that 41st Street. Clearly, the condition that it's in now is not conducive to bringing people through this area. But, you know, I'm more than open to keep that as a possibility on a go-forward basis.
Right. So again, I want to note to you, you really believe that the changes may be coming. I am informing you on behalf of the community board, the changes are coming. The amount of capital budget money in the Port Authority's budget for this terminal replacement is unbelievable. It's one of
And
the
Joe,
largest.
when do you see, and please don't take this in the wrong way,
Sure.
but when do you see this change coming?
The Port Authority board just approved decking over certain open cuts in order to create temporary bus parking lots at its last meeting in December. Like they're starting construction in 2023 and to start the whole preparation. It's not like a small thing. And we can talk to you separately and give you a lot of information about this. It's no longer a pie in the sky. It may happen. And I know in your work, you may not have been keyed into it like we are. That's why I'm trying to let you know this is
Thank
really
you.
happening.
Yep. Thank you.
The second thing is, let's go back to the address for a second. I understand the wayfinding issues, but you have actually solved it by noting the residences and the offices. I think this location, I would recommend stays as 330 West 42nd Street with 2 entrances. It is not impossible with wayfinding and signs to have 330 West 42nd Street, the residences, 330 West 42nd Street, the offices, and to have certain signage that directs you down the block. It's such a great address, 330 West 42. I would really recommend that you consider looking at that and trying to work with it. Otherwise, oh, the lobby salvage. Could you go back to the plan for a second? We understand fully it's not part of this proposal, but you said you salvaged certain portions of the lobby. Can I make the assumption that you salvaged the wall elements and the door elements and the portion that is in the light yellow from the entry back to where the elevator banks start? Is that correct, Julie?
That is correct. The yellow also includes the vestibule. That is all that was retained in place. And that is also getting restored along with the exterior restoration.
So is the plan, the general plan, and then the lobby, the portion in front of the elevators, that was also had been modified but had some original elements there. Is the plan to restore, to reinstall in a restored fashion that those elements there, to reuse them somehow? Is that the general idea? Because it wasn't clear. We understood where they were entering, but it wasn't clear what was being restored.
The elevator doors have been maintained in place. They're being fully restored. The metal panel has been removed and is being relocated within the project, but it is not being retained exactly in the manner.
Oh, no, I understand it's not exact,
Yeah.
but could you just describe, if we looked at this, and maybe someone can move the cursor to say where the metal panels would be reinstalled, just so we have an idea.
Yeah, I believe
really
so.
It's really helpful to this discussion because it shows that you're trying to do something different from when you started.
We appreciate the questions, and to be honest, some of the decisions are still in progress. So we're not quite prepared to discuss specifics tonight. But
Right, but from public information, you don't need to caveat it by saying, we don't know exactly, here is our concept plan. Just in order to allay these fears and issues, it will go a long way toward diffusing that issue. Am I signaling something that you understand?
Yes, it is, Joe, and sincerely, other than what Tricia said, we do not have that design.
Okay.
Okay. It's a planning diagram. At this point, that yellow area also indicates the required mailboxes and package rooms and so on and so forth. So that doesn't even represent the design of the plan itself.
I would just offer, as you go through this public process, anything even in concept and that which can be noted that is subject to change would be helpful in addressing that, helps diffuse the other issues that have happened in the building. I leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Joe. David Solnick. Welcome, David.
Yes, hi. I think it was a great presentation. I really have no issues with what was presented. I have some questions about 2 particular things that weren't presented. The first one has to do with what's in front of the building. So the sidewalk was originally a custom material, matches the building color. It's you know, a lot of it's broken up, some of it's still there, you can still see what it was. So my first question is, what are your plans for that area and the trees?
Sure. Maybe I'll start the discussion with the sidewalk. So we actually did some historic research comparing the existing sidewalk condition to historic photos. And it does actually appear that what is there now, including the colored sidewalk, is not the original or the historic design for the sidewalk. So while interesting, the decision has been made to not retain that, and the sidewalk will be replaced. I believe, Tricia, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it is outside the boundary line of the individual landmark site. So landmarks will not be regulating the sidewalk change.
So okay, but so your plan, are you saying the plan is just to make it standard concrete?
That is correct. We will not be petitioning the city for a distinctive sidewalk. And the trees will remain.
There's
And
one
what
tree
about
that is no longer
and-
alive. We are gonna fully keep all the trees in the tree pits, and there is one tree that was no longer alive that we're replacing.
And the tree pit surrounds, do you have a design for those? If any?
No.
You know, David, we don't, and if we do, we'll be happy to conveniently share that with you.
Okay, and my second issue was, I'm guessing you're going to say you don't have it yet, but you're going to be required to produce a waste management plan based on the recently passed regulations for a residential building over 150 units that's substantially renovated or new. Do you have any, and my guess is that waste management plan is going to involve some of the 41st Street facade. Do you have any progress on that, or any concept behind that?
There, first off, the 41st Street door that's been discussed will be the service door for removal of refuse. We have planning for all the waste management in the lower level under the chute for the resident.
You're kind of breaking up.
Residential, including wet and we have accommodated planning for wet, dry, and recycled material in the waste management, and we certainly hope that will involve compost.
And compacting and baling, and there's lots of issues.
Yes, sir.
Will we see any of that in a subsequent presentation?
Required to be submitted as part of landmarks, or submitted at all, David, I think, unless it's has a zoning issue attached to it.
Yeah, no landmarks, no zoning issues.
Yeah, it's a building, it's a building permit issue, not a zoning issue, right? Although I think there is some issues about space requirements that could, that can actually allow you to increase the square footage. I don't, to not count certain areas in the square footage. So that's actually a zoning issue.
Yeah, there will be no change to the zoning area of the building.
And the other thing is, I live next door. I'm watching this building. I live next door in the Orion, and our apartment actually looks over the building. It's been a very, very long process. Can you speak to the course of the, where this, maybe a little bit about why it is taking so long, but I guess more importantly, what's your expectation as far as its completion?
Maybe Dan or Jerry, you can speak to that.
Jerry, do you want to do that? Or
yeah, sure, Dan. Thank you very much. And thank you, David, for the question. It may seem slow and long for you, but it's been very active for us because we've been taking care of the back of the house. We've spent over $100 million so far on replacing all of the elevators, all of the electricity, all distribution, new bus ducts, all of the vertical transportation, and all of the back of the house things. We've got a new generator, and as I said, it's over $100 million. And it may seem long time, but these things take a while to do. And we're actually on time for phase one. This has always been a two-phase project for us, which is phase one, finish the back of the house, get your most up-to-date air conditioning system with the most fresh air that you can possibly enjoy, get the best electric system with a bus duct that runs up the middle of the building that allows the best distribution by our tenants, as well as all of the other niceties. As you see, we've not started lobbies, we've not started any of the obvious work that goes on in a project like this. But, $110 million later, we feel we've been very busy.
And what's your ETA?
ETA, we expect to be, building within the next 6 months, and up and running and leasing apartments on the ground level, or rather on the upper levels, by 24. And we will be white boxing the 300,000 square feet in lower levels beginning in the next 2 months, and trying to attract an office tenant down there. As you know, the office market has changed drastically since we began this project. We're actively in the market, so we're running on both cylinders, residential and the commercial.
Yeah, and then the conversion the partial conversion to residential makes a whole lot of sense.
It was not an easy decision from an economic standpoint, David, but from a supply and demand standpoint, it was obvious.
Yeah.
David,
Okay,
thank you. David Holoko, welcome to the committee. David is a member of the community board. And David, we appreciate you being here. So you're next up.
Okay, well, thanks for inviting me. Julie, that was an amazing presentation without an or an thank you for that. I have a question. I walked by the building today and I peeked through the windows of the construction fence and saw that there seemed to be absolutely nothing left of the original first floor facade on 41st or 42nd. Can you tell me what's become of that material?
So that work that you saw is all part of the storefront restoration in order to address the severely deteriorated metal elements as well as damage to the backup brick. Those elements were removed and they've been salvaged for replication. And everything will be repaired and waterproofed and put back according to all of the original materials and dimensions and historic finishes. And
So none of it could be restored.
No, let me add to that. So it was very arduously cataloged and taken off, photo documented with help via multiple consultants, and all the material that was deemed and fully evaluated to be restored or repaired is currently in the process of being repaired. And we've done, this has all been very well documented. It all had to be removed to be brought up to the state. And then any of the materials that were too far gone are being fully replicated, but there is a very large balance of material that is being restored.
Okay, that's reassuring to hear. I'm primarily concerned about the main entrance. I mean, it would be hard to find a more sensitive building in New York, and main entrances are particularly sensitive areas. And this is one on which Raymond Hood obviously lavished a lot of attention. And when you point out other contemporary buildings that have canopies, I think that simply points to how deliberate Hood was in not including one. And if we could go back to maybe the original photo of the entrance and look at that, what he was really doing was it's all about motion. The entrance is in streamline modern style, which was known for speed lines. And it's as if he's picking up the dynamism of the flow of traffic on the street and drawing it into the lobby. And that's why the lobby walls were the same material as the facade. It was a continuous experience. The interior was of a piece with the exterior, and there was this sense of continuity. I think that, and even where he's got the address sign here, even though it's down over that opening, it's kind of floating in air so that you can see those curved surfaces rounding the corner and flowing inward. And I'm really distressed about the possibility of the new canopy and that it would complicate this. And if we could look at the front image that shows the canopy next to the drawing without the canopy, not this one, but it's actually, yes. You know, that's quite a difference between the two. There's this very strong sense of inward flow in what Raymond Hood designed. And what you introduce with the canopy is a sense of outward projection that I think fights with that sense of inward flow. The commercial entrance off to the right, that's a much less sensitive location. You could even make that canopy more than 10 inches and it wouldn't bother me. But, you know, this is so much an important part of Hood's design that I would be very hesitant to introduce that canopy. I'm also wondering if the existing doors, which we all remember very well from having gone through them so many times, were those salvageable or were they original?
The doors that were there prior to the 2021 approval, those were not original. No,
Oh,
those had
okay.
been replaced with aluminum in, I want to say, the 70s, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
I remember them being replaced.
Okay. And I'm wondering why you are increasing the height of the door over what the original design was.
Sure. So as part of the 2021 approval, we already were proposing a height increase from the original 7-foot height to 8'2". And that height increase was approved both by this committee as well as landmarks at the public hearing. So we already have an approval for an increase in height. And when the team restudied the change to the new use, it was determined that an extra 10 inches would just open up the entrance a little bit and create a more welcoming entry point as the center of the building, create a little bit more light infiltration as well. The team also did study very carefully the design of the marquee and the projection to make sure that there was a balance of the projecting elements versus the recess, because that was important to the team to retain the balance that was part of Hood's design. We also think that the curve of the marquee balances out the curve of the walls and creates this interesting juxtaposition that still allows you to follow the flow of the lines into the vestibule.
Yeah, I mean, the canopy does cut down on light coming in. If you're concerned about light, it's really the major thing that I'm concerned about, that it hurts Hood's original design. And if you look at the other examples that you showed of buildings that have canopies, none of them have this effect that's happening at the sides going on. I think it's very clear to see that this was all about a continuous flow from the outside to the inside. And as I said, I think the canopy introduces a contrary note of outward projection. So that's my major concern. And I'd like to simply agree with Joe Restuccia that, you know, anything you could do in terms of the lobby and putting back the original material that was in very good shape because it wasn't exposed to the weather in a sensitive way would be very welcome. And even though it's not under Landmark's purview, that's something that can earn you a lot of public support for the parts of your project that are under public purview.
Yes, David, thank you very much for those comments. Dale, I think you had one more comment to add.
Yes, I did. Thank you. Yeah, it was just to piggyback on what Joe mentioned about the Port Authority plan. So I'm not specifically sure what's going to be across 41st Street in the future intercity bus terminal, but there was a lot of
storefronts.
Yeah, that's what I was going to bring up, Joe. There was a lot of talk about like street activation at the store, at the retail level within the terminal, and especially talk of like smaller parcel storefronts. and some, so I would, definitely familiarize yourselves with the Port Authority's plan for that, because it's across the street, and it could really definitely have an impact on how you activate your own streetscape on 41st Street. Thanks.
Dale, thank you. Okay, we want to try to get to the end of this. So Chris, you have a comment, and then David, you can wrap us up. Chris?
Yeah, one of the examples you gave for an extended canopy was 30 Rockefeller Center, right? I've worked at 30 Rock and I've worked at 75 Rock, and actually had to go over and see an old boss recently. Those expansions were added to northwest and south and east, but throughout the rest of the campus, much of the entrances have been original. In fact, just north of Radio City Hall, you have the commercial entrances with the Pegasus and Athena, and that does not have a canopy at all there. If we're trying to stay true to original concept of hood, I do support David's call outs and concerns as well. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe just to clarify the comment, I appreciate the thought. So the example we showed was 1250 Avenue of the Americas, which is a different building, but there were many canopies incorporated throughout the Rockefeller Center campus, not specifically at 30 Rock, but there are 3 different canopies at 1250, and the canopy approved that was shown on the precedent slide at the 6th Avenue entrance of 1250 was something that went through the commission level approval and was deemed appropriate to the building.
Julie, thank you. Chris, thank you. Christine Berthet has joined us from the community board. Welcome, Christine.
Yes, thank you. Such a fantastic presentation and very exciting. Oh, there is an echo somewhere. I had a question about the sidewalk in the front, and you have addressed it. Are you going to plant more trees in the front?
We have 4 existing plant tree pits, 3 of which have trees. We're going to be replacing the tree that is no longer there.
Okay. And then on 41st Street, as we are discussing you having a store, etc., the sidewalk is really inadequate. And are you going to ask DOT to extend the sidewalk? If you can extend the sidewalk, I think you would be well served by that.
I think it's certainly something that the team can further explore.
Yeah, and plant trees there as well.
Christine, we share your concern very much there, and I think your comment is one that we should take to the next level with the DOT.
Okay, I think they are pretty open right now doing extensions. If you can put that into your capital expense and put some, I appreciate that. Thank you.
And Christine, I just received confirmation from ownership that there is a plan to add trees to 41st Street.
Yeah, but if you add trees right now on 41st Street, there is no way to walk, right? So I think there is a team at DOT now, which is very excited about working on pedestrians. So you could reach out. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. David, you had one comment, and then
yeah, I do, and it's going back to the entrance. I really, it's sort of dueling architects perhaps, but I have to disagree about David's assessment of the main entrance. I actually think the design that's proposed enhances the. It certainly doesn't detract from the inward, but of course the original design. I mean, David's right that it's about flow in, but obviously flow goes 2 ways. It's also about flow out. You can't have flow in without flow out, or you'd fill up the building with people and they wouldn't be able to get out. So it's about flow in 2 directions. And I think this design does not detract from the inward flow, and maybe even enhances it, in my view. And probably enhances the outward flow as well, because it is projecting. But while David was making that comment, I was looking very carefully at the entrance, and I just don't see that it's detracting from the original concept. So different views of different designers.
David, thank you. We're going to make a rule, no more architects on the committee whatsoever. I think that would be a good rule. Joe and Dale, if we could try to wrap this up, if you have new things to add, Joe or Dale? Because
I was going to make a motion at the end.
okay, Dale, did you have something to add?
Real quick. I too have a degree in architecture, having studied at the Irwin S. Channon School of Architecture with a concentration on deco, this era design in New York, and I am in favor of the canopy. And sorry, JD, you have 3 architects on your.
Well, I majored in art history at NYU and Columbia, so I think I can weigh in on deco too. But before I do that, Janine, any member of the public with us that would like to speak?
No, I don't see any hands raised in the attendees.
Thank you. I'm going to wrap this up before we go to a motion to thank Tricia and Julie and Dan and Jared. And I echo those comments about Julie's excellent presentation with no ahs or oohs. You should teach a course on coming for committee. So thank you, and thanks for everybody's comments. Joe Restuccia, did you have a motion?
Yes. So leave the slide up because it's going to help me go through it. I move that the committee support the new marquee at the building entry, increase the height of the doors by 10 inches, entry doors by 10 inches, create a new commercial entry at the existing west storefront, restore the McGraw Hill signage and actually do a lot of thank yous about restoring that, approve the terrace doors on 16th and 32 and the partitions, but add some conditions. The first one is that the applicant seriously look at keeping the 330 West 42nd Street address over the main entrance and just having residences and offices and make it clear, put in some additional wayfinding signage as needed. I think it's an historic part of the building and it really restores the whole ground floor to what it was. The second one is that they look at the West 41st Street storefronts in relation to the Port Authority bus terminal reconstruction. I would ask Janine that you send them all the information and links that we have about that. That is going to be a major, that street will be not only, that's going to be reconstructed also. So Christine's point about a larger sidewalk, let's put that in there because that should happen. The trees are required by zoning. The third item is that they look at the tree pit design both on 41st and 42nd Streets. And we will ask them to look at the guidelines developed by the Hudson Yards Hell's Kitchen bid for street tree planting size of beds around them. So we actually have with this great renovated landmark, an asset that brings green to the street and not just has trees as an afterthought. Those are the 3 conditions that I would add to this letter.
Thanks, Joe. Do we have a second on that motion?
I'll second it.
Okay, let's have some discussion about it. Joe, your first item was?
They maintain 330 West 42nd Street.
And your second item?
Is modify the West 41st Street storefront, not to have one door, but to include an actual storefront door. So they're prepared for the Port Authority coming. And the third is the tree pit design on 41st and 42nd to look at it in conjunction with the guidelines, the street design guidelines from the bid to have the largest planting area possible around the trees and to look at the sidewalk extension that Christine mentioned.
Thank you, Joe. Did you say something about the canopy?
The canopy is part of that was part of the items that I move that we approve it as is.
Gotcha. Thank you, Joe. David Solnick?
No, that hand is up from before. I seconded that. I seconded that motion.
Thank you, David. Dale, you had a question? No. So we have a motion before us. We have a second. We have comments, no comments. So is anybody opposed to the motion that we write a letter thanking you all for coming and with Joe's concerns? So I guess it's approved. Nobody's against it.
I'm a P&E.
Bob is P&E. Why is that, Bob? Because you're the executive director of the.
They pay, that building pays into the bid.
Gotcha. Okay, John. Julie, and team, congratulations and thank you for the care that you're going to take of this building. Much appreciated. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, everybody, for the time and the consideration.
Thank you, Jared. Well, that was great. Okay, let's wrap this up. I have one item of sort of new business, which I'm going to bring up probably every month. And then we have a new business item that Joe wants to bring up. The Port Authority of New Jersey and New York is moving ahead apparently with its plans 2023. Christine's here, she can tell us about that. They're going to move ahead with constructing these platforms, which eventually will be parks, but in the meantime, they're going to be bus staging platforms. So the working group of Port Authority, the CB4 working group with Port Authority is made up of the Land Use Committee, the Transportation Committee, and a member or two from the Hell's Kitchen South Coalition. That's Betty and Joe, also for housing eventually. So the working group meets and we kind of talk about what's already been agreed on by the community board. We're kind of following that, but as we're starting up again, there may be items that come up that I want to make sure that this committee and the public knows about. And if anybody has any questions, please tell me or Paul or Joe or Jesse, and we can relate it to the community, to the working group so they can discuss it. But right now they're going to start up meeting again with the working group. They're basically going to talk about these platforms, basically ask questions like, how long is it going to take? Where the bus is going to go, on what street. I think it should be 36th Street because Brian Weber's not here, so we can have him on that street.
That's a good one.
How long is it going to take? Is there going to be a construction task force so the community can know what the heck is going on? Questions like that. And also when they build the platform, is it going to be built in such a way that later on you could have a park and you could have trees and the roots could go down? Will there be enough depth or whatever? So if anybody wants to bring up anything, please tell me, email me or Paul or Joe or Christine. So we can ask Port Authority about it. And next month we'll have another report, but right now that's all we have to report. Christine, are you still with us, Christine?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, JD, you just covered everything. I mean, essentially that now that they have announced that they are building the platforms, we have like about 200 questions about what's going to happen. I mean, because those platforms are big. We're talking about a full block across the block and half a block in depth. And it's right there in Hell's Kitchen in the middle of, where we live. And
they're like $50 million too. It's not like a couple dollars for these platforms.
Yeah. And so we're going to have a lot of questions about, where are the construction trucks? It's going to be a lot of cement trucks, right? A lot of construction trucks. Are they going to close the tunnel while they are doing that? All those questions, simple questions that we'd like to have a sense of what's going to happen. It maybe inject our 2 cents as residents into that equation.
The good news is they're not demolishing buildings on 9th Avenue and didn't invoke eminent domain. So we've come a long way. So
that was the great news.
Everybody who pushed back to get to the place where you are in a very, very good communicative, collaborative process with Port Authority. So thank you, working group.
And the other thing I would say is that, we out of that, if they start building those platforms, even if they don't build the terminal, we'll get the parks. Right? So I think this is pretty good. So that's exciting.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And Dale's point at the very beginning was do no harm. And I think we're still concerned about that. Joe, anything to add? If not, new business, you want to bring up something?
Yes, on behalf of the last Friday, on behalf of the board.
Thank you, Christine.
Jesse and I attended an inspection of 410, 412 West 46th Street. That's one of those demo buildings. So let me just tell you, it was a very odd experience. The following people were there: Councilmember Eric Botcher plus 2 staff members, the Deputy Borough President plus 1 staff member, the new Assembly member my God.
Tony Simone.
Yeah, Tony Simone. The state senator had 2 representatives there. Dugan from Midtown North was there with another policeman, and the DA's office was going to be there. In the last moment, they canceled. HCC was there, and I will tell you, it was a cast of thousands. We were there to accompany an HPD inspector through the buildings. And after we introduced ourselves and had a whole discussion, tenants who were there informed us, the HPD inspector, the meeting was at 12. The HPD inspector came at 9:30. He had come and left before any of these individuals got there, and it was all arranged with all these agencies. But the very good piece of news is that, well, the odd piece of news, the buildings were up. There was a prospective purchaser who entered into a contract with the current owner, who's been done all the harassment and created the horrible conditions. That prospective purchaser was in place for about 60 days. And during that period of time, they acted on the owner's behalf, and they put temporary shoring in the 412 building, which was due to be demolished by the city of New York. The temporary shoring was installed through permits, and they negotiated everything. And the Department of Buildings inspected 2 weeks ago and deemed the shoring is complete enough to have HPD go in and do the final bit of it. So that building, as of today, could change tomorrow, will not be demolished. So I think that is a huge, huge achievement that we've all done over here. On the other side of it, which is the building that's occupied 410, there is a 7A proceeding. That's under Article 7A of the Real Property Law to appoint an administrator in buildings that have dangerous and hazardous conditions. And this coming week, this end of this week, is the last week of that trial. And there's a good expectation that the city will prevail and appoint an administrator to protect the 7 remaining out of 15 tenants in that building. So our inspection was to go with HPD to look at current conditions and dangerous conditions in the building. We did do an inspection. The building had open apartments, unlocked. There were people who had pushed the doors open and we had moved into apartments in the various couple of days back and forth. And while we were there, the tenants informed us that, in fact, someone had moved into a 4th floor apartment. The police did go with the entire crowd of people and knocked on the door. The man opened, saw the police, shut the door, pushed the door closed. A tenant across the hall actually had been forced out of that apartment last week. He gave the police his key. The police opened the door. The guy pushed the door closed again. That happened about 7 or 8 times. At which point I asked all the folks on the tour to exit the building because I felt the situation was escalating here and we could not be in the middle of something. And since that time, we have worked with the tenants. The tenants have been assisted to get all the vacant apartments locked. Because what happened between the Christmas and New Year's holiday with that deep freeze we had, pipes burst and the fire department went in and broke all the HPD locks on the vacant apartments here. So now the building is resecured and we will be able to report back, I would say, at our next meeting, what is happening at this location. And it is a truly brutal circumstance. The hallways were filthy. People were living in the hallways over this. Since the Friday meeting, there were fellows squatting back and forth with their pit bulls, moving in and out, trying to get to apartments. And from the community end, I will say that a number of volunteers arranged for the folks who were squatting there to be escorted out and new padlocks put on the doors, totally outside of the HPD process, just to bring security to these people's lives. It was a really horrible thing to watch. The top floor has a 97-year-old man in an apartment that is living through this.
Joe, thank you for that. Who is, you're saying people came into the building to squat?
The front doors are not properly closing. And on multiple occasions, tenants have seen people staying in the hallways, sleeping there, sleeping in the vacant apartments. And they have also, to be blunt, been harassed horribly by these people coming off the street in the building, going to the building.
Are these unhoused people?
These are homeless individuals who know the building is open and there's vacant apartments. So therefore they are coming in to live there. And it's drug activity and it's a lot of illegal activity happening.
Gotcha, Joe. Thank you. Paul, I think you also were there. Paul.
Joe, I want to thank you for all the hard work on that. I mean, it is a devastating situation there. But on the theme of demolition by neglect, do you have any other news on the West 47th Street building that was almost set ablaze?
Yes, the board met with the owners, JD. When do we, not the owners, when do we have that? We had a Zoom meeting.
We had a Zoom meeting with the tenants that were next door that were very.
Yes,
concerned.
yes, yes.
Andrew Berman and Blake Gopnik, who also lives next door. They were very concerned, and subsequently there has been an inspection of the door to the shed to the back. It's still ongoing, and no report yet about who started.
Yeah, but I thought that the owner had come forward and asked for the permit now.
No, the fire was deemed as arson. That is still under investigation by FDNY. The owner has hired an attorney to deal with a special permit. The board was contacted and communicated saying they were proceeding with that special permit. We haven't heard anything about 2 weeks, Paul.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I want everybody to know that's where we stood on that one.
Right.
Paul, want to wrap it up, the meeting, or would you want us to go on?
I would like to make a motion to adjourn, but I can't because I'm the
can make
co-chair,
a
but I would
motion to
entertain a
adjourn.
motion. I can entertain a motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Any objections? Sounds unanimous.
Hey,
Unanimous.
Everybody,
Happy
great.
New Year. Thank you.